This is Blists Hill, Victorian Town, in Shropshire. It's one of many theme parks around Britain, recreating Victorian life at the end of the 19th century. And if visitors' reactions are anything to go by, life back then wasn't half bad.
I think it was probably slower and more peaceful, and definitely a different quality of life.
Well, you could leave your front door open. You wouldn't do that now, would you? It seems an idyllic way of life now. When you look at the primitive way they lived, no telly and no car to worry about, to just sit there in your cottage and tend your gardens. It seemed a simple way of life.
But the curators that run theme parks like these have a choice to make. A choice of how to interpret the past. You include a bank. You're making a point about disposable income, how people have money to save. You include a doctor's surgery. You're making a point about improvements in public health. You include a shop stuffed with the latest goods. You're making a point about the economy, about the wealth of society.
But it's not just a question of what you include. It's what you leave out that counts too. Maybe Blists Hill doesn't tell the whole story.
So, what was life like in a Victorian city?
It's a question of interpretation. This is Manchester, a classic example of the Victorian city. Manchester emerged in the early decades of the Industrial Revolution, and at first it was just an ugly sprawl of factories and slums. Few back then denied how awful it was. This is one writer, Friedrich Engels, describing Manchester in 1844.
These streets contain unqualifiedly the most horrible dwellings I have yet beheld. They are crowded, literally, one upon the other.
But to their credit, the Victorians were determined to do something about the dreadful slums. These maps show how central Manchester changed in the second half of the 19th century. Streets of slum houses were swept away. This street, Anita Street, shows the kind of housing built to replace the old slums. Originally, it was called Sanitary Street, because the houses were built with water pumps and drains. There are street lamps, the streets broad enough for kids to play in. Meanwhile, in the city centre, slum clearances had made way for grand squares and public buildings. On the day they opened the new town hall, in 1877, the Manchester City News proclaimed,
"To the countless thousands who thronged the street, the ceremony was an effective indication of change."
Just 300 metres to the north, more evidence of change, of progress. The Barton Arcade opened in 1871, one of several shopping arcades cashing in on a consumer boom.
Wages rose in the Victorian period. It meant for the first time large numbers of people had money to spend. The goods on sale introduced variety and choice. Bicycles, sewing machines, all kinds of labour-saving gadgets, which left you more time to enjoy yourself.
In Manchester, evidence of this increased leisure time is all around. Public parks and libraries free to the general public, and art galleries, and football clubs. Man U was founded in 1902. No wonder the city fathers were so proud. As one local writer declared at the end of the century,
"Today, the city is entirely and satisfactorily modern."
But if that's the whole story, And how do you explain these photographs? They're of Manchester in the early 1900s, and there's no arguing with evidence like this. The slums hadn't been wiped out completely. They just moved further outwards. You can't imagine these people shopping in the Barton Arcade.
What about society in general? On average, had things got better? It's a hard question to answer, but the statistics make depressing reading.
Infant mortality stayed the same from 1850 to 1900. Half of all children still died before they were 5 years old.
And although life expectancy across the country rose from 41 to 49, in Manchester, life expectancy was just 28 years old.
So what do you do if you're designing a Victorian theme park? Do you include these facts, or ignore them? This is the Black Country Museum, just 30 miles from Blists Hill. Here, they've included a row of workers' cottages. They could have shown a slum, rife with disease and half-starved children. Instead, they chose to show the best kind of late Victorian workers' housing, similar to Anita Street in Manchester.
We don't cover the slum conditions, the abject poverty that probably large numbers of people lived in, the overcrowding and the insanitary conditions, because people really don't necessarily want to accept that, and they particularly perhaps don't want to be confronted with it on a lovely sunny Sunday afternoon out with Granny and the children.
So what was life like in a Victorian city?
It's a question of interpretation.
On the 6th of August 1945, a B-29 superfortress, the Enola Gay, dropped a new kind of bomb, an atom bomb, on the city of Hiroshima in Japan. It exploded with the force of 13,000 tons of TNT. The fireball melted metal and stone. The city was destroyed in an instant.
The man who gave the order to use this terrible new weapon was the American President, Harry Truman. Asked later, he said the decision to use the bomb wasn't difficult. I made the choice like that.
And within a week, the Japanese had surrendered. The war was over. The boys were coming home.
But was the decision to use the atom bomb really so black and white? Did Truman really just want to knock Japan out of the war, or did the Americans have more subtle reasons to display their newfound strength?
Like so many things in history,
It's a question of interpretation.